My husband thought covering my nose while I slept was hilarious. I taught him what funny really means. I'd been married to Jason for 3 years, and we'd been pretty happy overall. We both worked from home, him doing graphic design, and me writing marketing copy for tech companies. We had this nice routine where we'd have coffee together every morning, take walks at lunch, and cook dinner together most nights. Jason had always been a jokester, doing silly voices to make me laugh or hiding rubber spiders in my coffee mug. Harmless stuff that was actually funny. I even liked that about him when we first met because my ex had been super serious about everything. But something changed after Jason started watching these prank channels online. He'd spend hours watching couples pranking each other and laughing at the really mean ones where people cried or got hurt. I told him those videos were staged, and even if they weren't, it was messed up to enjoy watching someone's partner upset them. He said I didn't understand comedy. The first time he covered my nose while I was sleeping, I woke up gasping and panicked. Jason was sitting there laughing, saying my face was hilarious when I couldn't breathe. I was shaking and told him that was terrifying, not funny. He said I was overreacting and it was just for a second. He promised he wouldn't do it again. 2 nights later, he did it again. This time I woke up with his whole hand over my nose and mouth. I pushed him off and asked what was wrong with him. He said he was testing how long it would take me to wake up, and it was just an experiment. I slept on the couch that night. He apologized the next morning, brought me flowers, said he understood why I was upset. I went back to our bed. A week passed fine. Then I woke up at 3 a.m. to him holding my nose closed with his fingers. He immediately let go when I woke up, but he was giggling. Said he couldn't help himself because I looked so peaceful, and he wanted to see my surprised face. I told him if he did it one more time, I was done. He said I was threatening divorce over a harmless prank and called me dramatic. The next few nights I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I started drifting off, I'd jolt awake afraid he was about to do it again. I was exhausted at work, messing up projects, drinking 6 cups of coffee just to function. When I told Jason his prank was affecting my work, he said maybe I needed therapy for my trust issues. He kept doing it. Not every night, but randomly, so I never knew when it would happen. Sometimes he'd just hover his hand over my face to fake me out. Sometimes he'd actually do it. He started timing it, seeing if he could get to 5 seconds before I woke up. I tried sleeping in the guest room, but he'd sneak in there too. The lock on that door had been broken since we moved in, and Jason had never fixed it despite promising to. I knew exactly what I had to do. First, I started staying up late, later than him. When he'd go to bed, I'd wait until he was deep asleep. Then I'd stand over him with my phone flashlight shining in his face. The first time he woke up confused and scared. I said I was just checking if he was breathing because he was so quiet. Told him his reaction was hilarious. He didn't think it was funny. I kept doing it every single night. Set random alarms to wake up and check on him multiple times. 3 a.m., 4:30, 5:15. Each time with the flashlight right in his eyes. When he complained, I said I was worried about his breathing and wasn't this concern sweet? He started getting bags under his eyes. Then I upgraded. I'd shake him awake randomly to ask urgent questions. Did he remember to lock the front door? Did he hear that noise? Was he sure he set his alarm? When he'd get angry, I'd say I was just making sure he was okay because he'd been breathing weird. He tried wearing a sleep mask, but I'd just shake him harder. Within a week, Jason was a wreck. He was falling asleep during client calls, completely unable to focus on work. He begged me to stop. I said I would when I felt safe sleeping again. He promised he'd never touch my nose again. I said I'd heard that promise before. I kept going for another week. Jason tried sleeping in his car one night, but I went out there at 2 a.m. knocking on the window with a flashlight asking if he was okay. The neighbors saw and asked if everything was all right. Jason had to explain he was sleeping in his car for no real reason while his wife stood there in her pajamas looking concerned. He looked insane. Finally, he broke. Jason sat on the edge of our bed at 7 a.m. looking like he'd aged 10 years. Dark circles made his eyes look sunken, and his hands shook when he tried to run them through his hair. He stared at the carpet between his feet and started talking without looking at me. He couldn't do this anymore, he said. The sleep thing was breaking him. He understood now what he'd put me through. Really understood it. His voice cracked on the last part, and I sat in the doorway watching him carefully. I'd heard promises before, lots of them. The flowers after the couch night, the apology after the hand over my mouth, the swearing it would never happen again right before it happened again. I crossed my arms and waited for him to keep talking. He looked up at me finally, and I saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. Something scared. And desperate that matched exactly how I'd felt 2 weeks ago when I was drinking my 6th cup of coffee just to stay awake during a client call. I told him I'd consider stopping my wake-up campaign, but I needed to see real change first, not just words. He nodded so fast his whole body moved with it. He'd do anything, he said. Couples therapy, individual therapy, whatever I wanted. He'd never touch me while I was sleeping again, never even come near the bed when I was asleep. The way he said it reminded me exactly of how I'd sounded when I begged him to stop after that third time, when I'd promised I wasn't overreacting and please just listen to me. His desperation was a mirror of mine from 2 weeks back, and part of me felt satisfied watching him experience it. Another part felt sick that we'd gotten here at all. I told him we'd try it his way for one night and see what happened. He looked so relieved I thought he might cry. That night I turned off all my alarms for the first time in 2 weeks. Jason went to bed at 10 and I stayed up until 11, then climbed into our bed on my side. I lay there in the dark listening to him breathe, deep and steady and completely out. My body wouldn't relax. Every time I started drifting off, my eyes snapped open and my heart kicked into high gear. I'd trained myself to expect interruption, and now my nervous system wouldn't stand down even though I wanted it to. I counted Jason's breaths, watched the ceiling fan spin shadows across the room, checked the time on my phone every 20 minutes. At 2 in the morning, I finally fell asleep sitting up against the headboard. When I woke at 6, sunlight was coming through the curtains and Jason was already awake, propped on his elbow watching me. The relief on his face was so obvious it made something twist in my chest. He looked rested for the first time in weeks, and I couldn't figure out what I felt about that. It wasn't quite satisfaction, and it wasn't quite guilt. It was something messy in between that I didn't have a name for. Jason kept his promise for 3 days straight. He moved into the guest room even though I was back in our bed. He didn't argue about it or try to negotiate. The first morning after he moved, I walked past the guest room at 8 and saw him kneeling by the door with a screwdriver and a new lock mechanism from the hardware store. He was installing it carefully, testing the bolt after each screw. That lock had been broken for 8 months. I'd asked him to fix it probably 15 times, and he'd always said he would get to it eventually. Now he had it done in under an hour. I stood in the hallway watching him work, and noticed how he jumped slightly when he realized I was there. He flinched when I moved too quickly toward the kitchen. His whole body had this new tension in it, like he was waiting for me to do something unpredictable. I recognized it because I'd moved through the house the exact same way for weeks, never quite relaxed, always braced for whatever came next. On the 4th night, I woke up naturally at 2 in the morning. No alarm, no flashlight, just my eyes opening in the dark because my sleep was still broken even without trying. I lay there for a second getting my bearings, and then I saw him. Jason was standing in our bedroom doorway, not moving, just watching me sleep. The hallway light behind him made him a dark shape against the brightness. When I sat up fast, he jerked backward like I'd thrown something at him. He started explaining immediately, words tumbling out about how he was just checking if I was okay. He heard a noise and wanted to make sure I was safe. But the way he jumped when I moved told a different story than his mouth did. I asked him how long he'd been standing there and he said just a second, but his eyes shifted when he said it. I told him to go back to the guest room and he did without arguing. I lay back down but didn't sleep the rest of the night. The trust was completely gone on both sides now. I didn't trust him not to mess with my sleep, and he didn't trust me not to retaliate. We were 2 people living in the same house, both afraid of each other in different ways. The next day, I moved my stuff back to the guest room and started locking the door every night. Jason watched me carry my pillow and blankets down the hall but didn't say anything. He just nodded and went into our bedroom, closing that door behind him. We worked in separate rooms during the day now. He set up his design stuff in the bedroom and I kept my laptop at the kitchen table. We'd pass each other getting coffee or lunch and exchange maybe 3 words. Dinner happened in silence, both of us eating quickly and cleaning up our own plates before going back to our separate spaces. It was like living with a roommate I barely knew, except this roommate was legally my husband, and we were splitting a house we'd bought together when things were different. My work performance started improving as I finally got consistent sleep behind a locked door. I met my deadlines again, stopped making stupid mistakes in copy that my clients had to point out. But my boss sent me an email after reviewing my latest batch of projects asking if everything was okay. She said the writing was technically fine, but it had this edge to it now that wasn't there before. Everything I produced felt angry somehow, harder and sharper than my usual style. I read back through the marketing copy I'd written that week and saw what she meant. I'd described a software feature as aggressively efficient instead of streamlined. I'd called a product brutally effective instead of highly capable. The anger I felt had bled into my work without me noticing, changing my voice into something I didn't quite recognize. Jason's client work suffered in a new way now that he was sleeping again. He met his deadlines and his technical skills were fine, but 2 clients in the same week asked for revisions that felt more energetic and vibrant. One said his logo design looked competent but lifeless. Another said the website mock-up he'd created was functional, but had no creative spark. I saw him staring at his screen one afternoon, clicking through design options with this blank expression on his face. He was going through motions without any real energy behind them. The sleep deprivation had broken something in him that rest alone wasn't fixing. We attempted our first real conversation in a week on a Saturday afternoon. I suggested it, and Jason agreed immediately, too quickly, like he'd been waiting for me to bring it up. We sat at opposite ends of the couch with the full middle cushion empty between us. He apologized again, the same words I'd heard before. Then he tried to explain that the prank videos had made it seem funny and harmless, that everyone in the comments was laughing and saying they'd done similar things. I cut him off and pointed out that my terror was real every single time, that I'd wake up gasping and panicking and he'd just laugh. He went quiet for a long minute and then said he finally seemed to actually hear that. Not just hear the words, but understand what they meant. He admitted he kept doing it partly because he felt powerless in other areas of his life. His client base had been shrinking, and he was losing bids to younger designers who charged less. Making me react gave him some sense of control when everything else felt like it was slipping away. The honesty was uncomfortable, like he'd opened up something raw that we both had to look at now. It was the first genuine thing he'd said that didn't sound like an excuse or a deflection. I told him my retaliation came from the same dark place, that making him suffer gave me back some power after weeks of feeling helpless. We sat there looking at each other across the empty couch cushion, both understanding we'd hurt each other on purpose, and both knowing that understanding didn't fix anything. I brought up couples therapy the next day while we sat in the living room with our laptops on opposite sides of the room. Jason closed his computer immediately and said yes before I even finished explaining why we needed it. I started searching for therapists who specialized in relationship issues, and found one with decent reviews who could see us in 2 weeks. The wait felt wrong somehow, too much time to fall back into bad habits, but also not enough time to prepare for sitting in a room with a stranger and explaining how we'd deliberately tortured each other. Jason asked if we could try eating meals together again while we waited for the appointment. I agreed, but told him we needed to keep things simple and safe. No big conversations about what happened, just practice being in the same room without fear or anger. That first dinner together was stiff and awkward, both of us sitting at the kitchen table with our food between us like a barrier. Jason talked about a logo redesign he was working on for a coffee company, going into detail about color theory and font choices that I didn't really care about, but listened to anyway. I told him about a marketing campaign for a new app launch, describing the target audience and messaging strategy in more detail than necessary. We were filling silence with work talk, avoiding anything real, anything that mattered. The weather came up twice. We both commented on how nice it was outside, how we should take more walks again, how fresh air was good for clearing your head. Neither of us suggested actually taking a walk together. When dinner ended, we cleaned up the dishes side by side at the sink, careful not to let our hands touch when passing plates. It felt like being on a first date with someone I wasn't sure I actually liked, except this person was legally my husband, and we owned a house together. Jason suggested watching a movie the next evening, something we used to do every weekend before everything fell apart. I said okay, but insisted on a comedy we'd both seen before, nothing new that required focus or emotional investment. We needed something safe and familiar, something that wouldn't trigger any difficult conversations or remind us of better times. He picked the same silly action comedy we'd watched at least 5 times, the one with the car chases and the jokes we could quote from memory. We sat on the couch with a full cushion of empty space between us, both of us pressed against our respective armrests like we were trying to take up as little room as possible. The movie played and we laughed at the same parts we always laughed at, but the sound felt forced and hollow. Halfway through, during a quiet scene, Jason reached over slowly and touched my hand where it rested on the middle cushion. His fingers were warm and slightly shaky. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. Didn't give him any indication that the touch meant anything beyond basic tolerance. We stayed like that, connected but uncertain, his hand barely resting on mine, until the credits rolled. It was the first physical contact in 2 weeks that didn't involve fear or anger or deliberate cruelty. When the movie ended, we separated immediately, and I went to the guest room without discussion. That night, I did something that scared me even as I was doing it. I left the door unlocked. It was a small gesture of trust that felt enormous, like I was exposing myself to danger on purpose just to prove I could. I lay in bed staring at the doorway, my body tense and alert, waiting for Jason to appear. Every small sound in the house made my heart race. I woke up 4 times checking the empty doorway, my nervous system still wired for threat even though nothing bad was happening. The door stayed empty all night. Jason respected the boundary, stayed in our bedroom, didn't test my trust. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen making coffee for both of us, remembering exactly how I took mine without asking. 2 sugars, splash of cream, heated in the microwave for exactly 30 seconds, because I liked it slightly warmer than fresh brew. He handed me the mug and we went out to the back porch together, sitting in the plastic chairs we'd bought last summer. We didn't talk much, but the silence felt different from it had before, less hostile and more like two people who were too tired to fight. A neighbor walked by on the sidewalk and waved, calling out to ask if everything was okay. She'd clearly seen that weird night when Jason tried sleeping in his car, and I'd gone out there in my pajamas with a flashlight. I handled the question with a vague explanation about Jason having trouble sleeping lately, needing some air, nothing serious. The lie came easily, protecting our privacy, but also hiding what we'd actually become. The neighbor nodded and said something about trying melatonin before walking on. Jason looked at me with this expression that was equal parts grateful and ashamed, like he appreciated me covering for us but hated that there was something to cover. We spent the afternoon working in the same room for the first time since everything started, both of us at the dining table with our laptops and scattered papers. The silence was still uncomfortable, but it was productive silence, both of us focused on our respective projects instead of watching each other suspiciously. I caught Jason glancing at me a few times like he was making sure I was real, like he couldn't quite believe we were sitting together working normally. Around 6, Jason closed his laptop and picked up his phone, ordering takeout from my favorite Thai place without asking what I wanted. He just remembered my usual order, the pad Thai with extra peanuts and the spring rolls with the sweet sauce. When the food arrived, I found myself genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. We ate at the table instead of in front of screens, actually sharing a meal like normal people. During dinner, Jason told me he'd deleted all the prank channel subscriptions from his account. He showed me his phone to prove it, scrolling through his feed that was now full of design tutorials and cooking videos and woodworking projects. It was performative, this showing me, this proving he'd changed, but it also mattered. He was trying to demonstrate that he understood those videos had poisoned something in him, that watching people hurt each other for entertainment had made him think hurting me was acceptable. I told Jason that his pranks scared me, but what I did back scared me even more. Sitting there at the table with cold Thai food between us, I admitted that becoming someone who could plan and execute revenge like that made me feel sick. I'd turned into a person who could watch another human being suffer and feel satisfied about it, and that wasn't who I wanted to be. Jason listened without interrupting, his hands wrapped around his water glass. I could see him processing what I was saying, understanding maybe for the first time that his actions hadn't just hurt me, they'd changed me into someone capable of hurting him back without hesitation. The person who woke him up with a flashlight every night wasn't the woman he married, and we both knew it. We talked about how we got to this point, how his constant dismissing of my fear taught me that words were useless. I told him I tried talking, tried explaining, tried begging him to stop, and none of it worked until I made him feel what I felt. He nodded slowly and said he created this whole situation by refusing to take me seriously until I hurt him the way he'd been hurting me. The acknowledgement came too late to prevent the damage, but at least it was honest. We sat there looking at each other like strangers who shared a terrible secret, both of us carrying the weight of what we'd done. The conversation shifted to whether our marriage could actually survive this. We'd both deliberately hurt each other, both turned our home into a battlefield where sleep became a weapon. I asked if people could come back from that, if trust could rebuild after both partners proved they were willing to traumatize each other. Jason didn't have an answer, and neither did I. But we were finally asking the real questions instead of pretending everything would magically fix itself. The honesty felt raw and uncomfortable, but it was the first genuine thing between us in weeks. Jason asked if I wanted him to sleep on the couch until therapy started, giving me complete control of both bedrooms. I appreciated the offer because it showed he understood I needed to feel safe. But I suggested we try sharing our room again with one absolute rule that we both had to follow. No touching while the other person slept, period. No checking if someone was breathing, no accidental brushes, nothing. We'd sleep in the same bed, but with a clear boundary that neither of us could cross. Jason agreed immediately, and I could tell he was relieved I was willing to try. That night, we both lay in our bed completely rigid, hyper-aware of every breath and movement the other person made. The space between us felt huge even though we were only 2 feet apart. I stared at the ceiling trying to relax my muscles, but my body stayed tense and alert. It took me 2 hours to fall asleep, and even then it was light and fitful. I woke up 3 times in complete panic, my heart racing before my brain caught up and remembered nothing bad was happening. Each time I jolted awake, Jason was already awake too. I could see his eyes open in the dark, both of us clearly struggling with the same hypervigilance. Morning came with both of us exhausted again, but for completely different reasons than before. We weren't tired from deliberate sabotage anymore. We were tired from broken trust and nervous systems that wouldn't calm down. Jason got up first and made breakfast while I lay there gathering the energy to face the day. We ate scrambled eggs and toast quietly at the table, both of us looking like we'd survived something traumatic, which I guess we had. The bags under Jason's eyes matched mine now, and we moved carefully around each other like people recovering from the same illness. I had a work video call that morning with 3 colleagues to discuss a new campaign. I positioned my laptop so the lighting would hide the worst of the shadows under my eyes, but one of them still commented that I looked tired. I blamed it on a tight project deadline, maintaining the lie that my personal life was fine. The words came easily because I'd been practicing them, but the lie felt heavier each time I told it. My colleague suggested I take better care of myself and get more sleep, and I had to stop myself from laughing at the irony. If only she knew that sleep had become the central battlefield of my marriage. Jason's phone pinged during lunch with a therapy appointment reminder. We were still 5 days away from the first session, and those 5 days stretched ahead of us like an impossible distance. He looked at the reminder and then at me, asking if I thought we could make it that long without completely falling apart. I told him we had to make it because the alternative was admitting we'd destroyed something beyond repair. Neither of us wanted to say that out loud, so we'd just have to survive until someone professional could help us figure out if our marriage was salvageable. We established a new routine over the next few days that felt mechanical but functional. We worked separately during the day in different rooms, avoiding the tension of shared space. We ate meals together at the table, making small talk about work projects and weather. We spent evenings in the living room doing separate activities, him sketching design concepts while I read marketing reports. We slept in the same bed with careful distance between us, both trying to prove we could coexist peacefully. It was fragile and required constant attention, but it was something resembling normal life. We were functioning like roommates who'd signed a peace treaty, not like married people who loved each other. The night before our first therapy appointment, Jason had a nightmare. I was in that light sleep where I was half aware of everything around me when he started thrashing. His arm swung out and hit my shoulder hard enough to jolt me fully awake. My body flooded with adrenaline instantly, every muscle tensing as my brain screamed danger. It took several seconds for my rational mind to catch up and understand it was accidental, that he was asleep and having a bad dream. But those seconds felt endless. Jason woke up to find me pressed against the headboard with my knees pulled up, breathing hard and staring at him with wide eyes. The fear on my face seemed to hurt him more than anything I'd done deliberately. He scrambled backward on the bed, hands up like he was trying to show me he wasn't a threat. His voice came out shaky when he said he'd sleep somewhere else, anywhere else, that he didn't mean to scare me. I pressed myself harder against the headboard, trying to get my breathing under control. My heart was pounding, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I forced myself to take slow breaths and told him it wasn't his fault. Not really. My body just reacted now without checking if the threat was real. My nervous system had learned to expect danger, and it would take time to unlearn that response. We were both messed up in ways that wouldn't fix quickly. Jason sat on the edge of the bed looking at his hands. Neither of us slept much after that. The therapist's office had beige walls and a brown couch that was supposed to look calming, but just made me feel trapped. Jason sat on one end and I sat on the other with enough space between us for another person. The therapist, Felix Strickland, was maybe 50 with gray hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He asked us to explain why we were there. I started talking first, trying to make it sound less crazy than it was. I told him Jason had been waking me up at night as a prank and it scared me. Jason jumped in to say it wasn't that simple, that I'd retaliated by doing the same thing back to him. Felix listened without his face changing at all. When we were both done explaining, he pushed his glasses back up and said it sounded like we'd been in a power struggle where neither of us won. He was right, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel more real and more awful. Felix leaned back in his chair and asked what we wanted from therapy. Did we want to save the marriage or just end it without hating each other forever? Jason and I looked at each other across that empty couch space. I realized we'd never actually talked about whether we were trying to stay together or just trying to survive being in the same house. The question hung there between us, and neither of us knew how to answer it. Felix waited, not pushing us, just letting the silence stretch out until it got uncomfortable. Finally, I said I didn't know. Jason nodded and said he didn't know either. I took a breath and admitted I wasn't sure I could trust Jason again. Even him moving accidentally in his sleep had sent me into full panic mode. My body didn't believe he was safe anymore, no matter what my brain tried to tell it. Jason looked down at his hands and said he was scared of me too now. He said when he looked at me, he saw someone who could plan and execute revenge in a way that really hurt him, someone who could be cold about it. He said there was something in my eyes now that hadn't been there before, something that calculated and measured. Felix nodded slowly and said at least fear was honest. At least we were both being real about where we actually stood instead of pretending everything was fine. Felix pulled out a notebook and wrote something down. He said our homework for the next session was to each write 2 lists. The first list needed 3 things we appreciated about each other before all this started, back when things were good. The second list needed 3 boundaries we each required going forward, things that were absolutely not negotiable. We were supposed to come back in 3 days and share what we wrote. Jason asked if we should share the lists with each other before the session. Felix said no, bring them here first. He wanted to hear what we came up with separately before we started negotiating. I sat at my desk with a blank document open on my laptop. The cursor blinked at me while I tried to think of 3 things I appreciated about Jason before everything went wrong. It was harder than I expected. I had to dig through weeks of anger and fear and exhaustion to find the person I'd married. After 20 minutes, I finally started typing. His creativity, how he could look at a blank screen and make something beautiful. His ability to make me laugh with stupid voices and silly jokes that were actually funny. His excitement about cooking, how he'd try weird recipe combinations just to see what would happen. These things felt like they belonged to different people now, like I was writing about strangers I used to know. I saved the document and closed my laptop. The boundary list came much easier. I opened a new document and the words poured out fast. I needed complete control over my own sleep with no interference ever. I needed him to take my concerns seriously the first time I said something, not dismiss me until I had to make him understand through force. I needed him to understand that jokes had limits, and those limits were wherever someone said stop. Each boundary was basically a scar, a permanent mark left by something that had hurt me. I read through the list 3 times to make sure I meant every word. I did. We sat in Felix's office again 3 days later. Jason had his lists on his phone and I had mine printed out on paper. Felix asked Jason to share first. He read his appreciation list and I was surprised by what he remembered. My determination to finish projects even when they got hard. My problem-solving skills, how I could look at a complicated situation and figure out the steps to fix it. My loyalty, how I stuck with people and commitments even when things got difficult. He said these were qualities he'd always admired about me. Then he read his boundary list. He needed to feel safe from payback, to know I wouldn't hurt him just because I could. He needed direct communication instead of punishment, actual words about problems instead of actions designed to make him suffer. He needed to rebuild without constant reminders of his failures, to be able to move forward instead of staying stuck in what he'd done wrong. I read my list next, and Felix listened carefully to both. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said something that made both of us uncomfortable. He pointed out that my determination and problem-solving skills, the things Jason loved about me, were exactly what made my revenge so effective. I'd taken the best parts of myself and turned them into weapons. The qualities that made me good at my job and good in relationships became tools for hurting someone I was supposed to love. It was an observation neither of us could argue with. Our strengths had become our worst tools when we decided to hurt each other. Felix gave us new homework. We needed to spend 30 minutes every day doing something together that had nothing to do with what happened. No talking about the pranks, no apologizing, no processing feelings or working through problems. Just an activity we both enjoyed doing together. The point was to remember we were people who could exist in the same space without everything being about damage and repair. Jason suggested cooking since that used to be our thing. I agreed even though the idea of being in a kitchen with knives and hot surfaces while we were still this broken seemed risky. Felix said to start with something simple, maybe just making sandwiches together or chopping vegetables for a salad. Build back up to the complicated recipes slowly. The first cooking session felt like performing surgery while someone watched. I pulled out the pasta maker from the cabinet where it had been sitting unused for weeks, and Jason got the flour from the pantry without me asking. We moved around each other with too much space between us, like dancers who forgot the choreography and were afraid of stepping on toes. I measured flour onto the counter and made a well in the center exactly the way I'd done it dozens of times before, but my hands felt clumsy. Jason cracked eggs into the well, and we both stared at the yellow yolks like they held answers. Neither of us spoke much except for necessary things like asking where the rolling pin was or if the water should boil yet. When our hands accidentally touched reaching for the same measuring cup, we both jerked back fast. The pasta came out fine, technically correct in every way, but eating it felt like chewing cardboard. We cleaned up together in the same careful silence, loading the dishwasher with precise movements that kept us from getting too close. 2 nights later, we made pasta again, and it was slightly less awful. Jason actually hummed a little while kneading dough, and I didn't feel my shoulders up around my ears the whole time. We fell into the old rhythm in small ways, him passing me things before I asked, and me knowing when to step left, so he could reach the stove. By the 3rd session, something shifted. Jason was rolling out a sheet of dough, and it tore right down the middle. He looked at the ruined pasta and made this dramatic, sad face, then said in a ridiculous voice that his pasta rolling skills had clearly peaked in college, and it was all downhill from here. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not a polite acknowledgement, but a real surprised burst of sound that came out before I could stop it. The laugh felt strange in my throat, like I'd forgotten how to do it properly. Jason looked up fast when he heard it and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. We both kind of froze there for a second, surprised that something normal had just happened between us. Then we kept cooking, and the rest of the session was easier. Not perfect, but closer to what we used to be. That night, I woke up at 2 in the morning for no reason, just suddenly awake in the dark. My eyes adjusted and I could see Jason next to me, lying on his back with the blanket pulled up to his chest. Without thinking, my gaze went straight to his hands, checking that they were visible on top of the covers, both palms up and nowhere near my face. My body did it automatically, this new reflex I'd developed. I was still checking when Jason's eyes opened. He was awake, had probably been awake, and he watched me looking at his hands. The hurt on his face was sharp and immediate. His mouth did this thing where it tightened at the corners and his eyes went flat. We both lay there completely still, neither of us saying anything, both of us staring at the ceiling now instead of at each other. I could hear him breathing, could feel the tension coming off his body in waves. My heart was pounding even though nothing bad had happened, even though he hadn't moved at all. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, both pretending to fall back asleep, both knowing the other person was wide awake and thinking about what just happened. When morning finally came, we got up and went through our routines without mentioning it. At our next therapy session, I told Felix about waking up and checking Jason's hands. Felix nodded like this was the most expected thing in the world. He explained that trauma responses don't follow straight lines, that my nervous system had been trained to see Jason's hands as a threat, and it would take time to untrain that response. He said healing wasn't about never having bad moments. It was about having fewer of them over time and handling them better when they came. Then he suggested I might benefit from seeing someone individually, a therapist who worked specifically with trauma, to help process the fear that was now wired deep into how my body worked. I pushed back on that idea immediately. Getting individual therapy felt like admitting Jason had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed just by him stopping the pranks. It felt like permanent damage, like I was now a person who needed professional help to sleep normally in my own bed. Felix let me sit with that resistance for a minute, then asked what I was afraid the individual therapy would mean. I didn't have a good answer except that it scared me. After the session, Jason brought it up in the car. He said he thought I should try the individual therapy, that he'd do it too if it would help. He looked tired when he said it, older somehow than he'd looked a month ago. He told me he knew he'd caused damage he couldn't personally fix, that some things needed more than just him promising to do better. His voice was quiet and he kept his eyes on the road, but I could tell he meant it. Something about his willingness to admit he'd broken me badly enough that I needed outside help felt different from his previous apologies. Those had all been about him feeling bad or wanting me to forgive him. This was about him actually seeing what he'd done and taking responsibility for consequences that extended beyond our relationship. I agreed to try 3 sessions with whoever Felix recommended. Just 3, to see if it helped. The trauma specialist's name was Aurora McNamara, and her office was in a different building than Felix's, closer to downtown. She had plants everywhere and one of those sound machines playing fake rain. In our first session, she asked me to describe what happened, and I went through the whole thing from Jason's first prank to my retaliation campaign. When I finished, she was quiet for a bit. Then she said something I hadn't considered. She told me that my retaliation, while effective at making Jason stop, had also traumatized me. I'd had to become someone capable of sustained cruelty, someone who could watch another person suffer and keep inflicting that suffering night after night. That wasn't who I was before, and becoming that person had changed me in ways that went beyond just being afraid of Jason's hands. I'd won the war, but I'd lost something in myself to win it. The victory was hollow because I'd had to damage my own sense of who I was to achieve it. I sat there in her office with the fake rain playing and realized she was right. I didn't just feel afraid now, I felt mean in a way I never had before. Jason started his own individual therapy the same week. His therapist was someone Felix had recommended, a guy who worked with people who'd hurt their partners. Jason came home from his first session and went straight to our bedroom, didn't talk to me for 2 hours. When he finally came out, he looked like he'd been crying. We made dinner together in near silence, and then after we ate, he told me what had happened in the session. His therapist had asked him why he needed to control my sleep, what he was really trying to control. Jason said he didn't have an answer yet, but the question had hit him hard. He was still working on figuring it out, still trying to understand what had been going on in his head that made terrorizing me seem acceptable or funny. I appreciated that he told me even though it was clearly hard for him to talk about. 6 weeks had passed since Jason broke down and begged me to stop waking him up. We were going to therapy twice a week now, him to his individual sessions and me to mine, plus our couple sessions with Felix. Our marriage was slowly turning into something new, something that looked less like what we'd had before, and more like a careful arrangement between 2 people who'd hurt each other badly. We weren't happy yet, not in any real sense, but we weren't actively destroying each other anymore either. We could be in the same room without tension crackling between us. We could cook together without it feeling like a performance. We could talk about our days and actually listen to each other's answers. It was progress, just not the kind that felt good. It felt more like building something from scratch after a fire burned down the original house. One morning I woke up and realized I'd slept through the entire night without waking up even once. No panic, no checking Jason's hands, no jolting awake at 3 a.m. convinced something was wrong. I opened my eyes and Jason was already awake, sitting up against the headboard reading something on his phone. When he saw I was up, he smiled at me, and it was a genuine smile, not one of the careful, measured smiles we'd been giving each other for weeks. It was the kind of smile he used to give me before any of this happened, warm and unguarded. I smiled back and we stayed like that for a minute, just looking at each other in the morning light coming through the window. That night we had sex for the first time in 2 months. It was tentative and awkward, nothing like it used to be when we'd been comfortable with each other. We moved carefully, both of us hyper-aware of the other person's reactions, both of us trying to make sure this was okay. Afterward, Jason started crying, not loud sobbing, but quiet tears running down his face. He told me he'd thought we'd never be intimate again, that he'd destroyed that possibility completely when he kept covering my nose. He said he'd been sure I'd never want him to touch me again. I held him while he cried and realized I'd thought the same thing, had been convinced that part of our marriage was over forever. Our next session with Felix fell on a Tuesday afternoon, both of us sitting in those familiar chairs with the fake rain playing through the speaker. Felix looked at us over his glasses and said most couples who hurt each other this badly either split up or stay together in mutual resentment, that we were choosing a harder path. He said we were actually facing what we did and why instead of pretending it never happened or letting it poison everything forever. It didn't feel heroic like he made it sound. It just felt exhausting, like we were doing homework every single day just to stay married to each other. Jason's hand found mine on the couch cushion between us, and I let him hold it, which was progress, I guess. Jason's client work started getting better around week 7 of his individual therapy. He came out of his office one afternoon looking genuinely excited for the first time in months, telling me a difficult client had just sent an email praising his new logo design. The client used words like fresh and bold, said it captured exactly what they wanted. I could see Jason's confidence rebuilding in real time, his shoulders less hunched, his smile reaching his eyes. My own writing changed too, losing that angry edge that had crept into everything I produced. My copy became sharp in a different way, persuasive without being aggressive, confident without being mean. My boss sent me a message saying whatever I was doing differently, I should keep doing it. 3 months after everything fell apart, both our individual therapists agreed we were ready to reduce sessions to once a week. Felix confirmed it in our couples session, saying the training wheels were coming off slowly. The idea terrified both of us. We'd gotten used to having professional help twice a week, someone to intervene if we started falling back into old patterns. Jason asked what we were supposed to do if things got bad between sessions, and Felix reminded us we had tools now, that we'd proven we could use them. He was right, but it still felt like being pushed out of the nest before we were ready. We couldn't live in crisis mode forever, though. Couldn't keep treating our marriage like an emergency that needed constant supervision. I suggested we take a weekend trip the following Friday night while we were doing dishes together. Jason nearly dropped the plate he was drying, surprised enough that water dripped onto the floor. He asked if I was serious, and I said yes, that we hadn't gone anywhere together since before the prank started. We spent the next hour looking at cabin rentals on my laptop, sitting close together on the couch, debating whether we wanted mountains or lake views. We settled on a place 2 hours away, neutral territory that didn't carry any memories of what we'd done to each other. The house where everything happened felt too loaded with bad associations to properly relax. Jason booked it immediately like he was afraid I'd change my mind. The cabin weekend turned out good. Not perfect, but genuinely good in a way that felt real. We hiked a trail through pine trees on Saturday morning, neither of us talking much but comfortable in the silence. We cooked meals together in the tiny kitchen, falling back into our old rhythm of him chopping vegetables while I handled the stove. We played board games at the wooden table, competitive but laughing about it instead of letting it turn mean. Saturday night we slept in the same bed without fear, both of us relaxed enough to actually rest. I only checked his hand position once during the night, caught myself doing it and forced myself to stop. Progress felt incremental but real, like we were building something new from the ground up instead of trying to repair what was broken. Back home on Monday, we decided to redecorate the bedroom. We couldn't keep sleeping in the space where so much damage had happened, where I'd spent weeks jolting awake in terror, and Jason had covered my nose while giggling. We spent Tuesday afternoon at the hardware store picking out paint colors, settling on a soft gray that felt calming. Wednesday, we moved all the furniture out and painted together, getting speckles on our clothes and hair. Thursday, we bought new bedding, dark blue instead of the white we'd had before. We rearranged everything, putting the bed against a different wall, moving the dresser to where the nightstand used to be. It was symbolic, but it helped, creating a room that didn't carry the weight of what we'd become at our worst. Jason came home from somewhere on a Thursday evening looking shaken, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly when he set his keys down. I asked what was wrong, and he told me he'd just been to his first meeting of a support group for people who damage their relationships through behavior that escalated. He sat at the kitchen table and described hearing stories from other people, pranks that had ended marriages or worse, someone whose wife left him after he kept hiding her anxiety medication as a joke. Jason was understanding his actions in a larger context now, seeing that what he'd done to me wasn't unique or funny, that it fit a pattern of people who hurt their partners and called it harmless. He cried a little while telling me about it, and I sat with him, not offering comfort exactly, but not leaving him alone with it either. I joined an online forum for people recovering from sleep-related trauma the following week, which sounded absurd when I typed the search terms. But then I was reading posts from others who understood the specific terror of being woken by someone you're supposed to trust. People whose partners had done things during their sleep that left them unable to rest properly for months or years. One woman described her husband tickling her awake as a joke until she developed insomnia so severe she needed medication. Another person's partner would shake them awake to ask random questions, exactly like I'd done to Jason. I wasn't alone in this weird, specific damage. Other people had lived through versions of what happened to us and survived it. Some of them were still married, some weren't. All of them understood something most people never would. We hosted dinner with two friends for the first time since everything happened, Mark and Sophie, who we'd known since college. They came over on a Saturday night and we cooked pasta together, drank wine, played cards at the dining table. It felt almost normal, like we were the couple we used to be before Jason started watching those prank videos. They didn't know what we'd been through and we didn't tell them, keeping up the facade that everything was fine. But being around other people reminded us we were still capable of functioning socially, that we could laugh and joke and be present without the weight of therapy and trauma hanging over everything. After they left, Jason and I cleaned up together in comfortable silence, both of us tired but in a good way. 6 months after Jason's breaking point, we had what Felix called a milestone session, where we reviewed how far we'd come. We sat in his office going through a mental checklist of progress. We were sleeping in the same bed without panic, my body no longer jolting awake expecting danger. We were communicating directly about problems instead of letting resentment build or retaliating with cruelty. We were rebuilding intimacy slowly, having sex maybe once a week, but without the fear and awkwardness that had marked our first attempt. Felix pointed out that we weren't the same people we were when this all started, that our marriage wasn't the same either. We'd fundamentally changed each other through what we'd done, destroyed the innocent trust we used to have, and replaced it with something more careful and deliberate. It wasn't worse exactly, just different, like we'd survived something together that left permanent marks. One evening, about 7 months into therapy, we're sitting on the couch after dinner and Jason asks if I've forgiven him. The question catches me off guard because we've been avoiding that specific word, dancing around it in sessions with Felix but never actually saying it. I set down my coffee mug and think about how to answer honestly. I tell him I don't know if forgiveness is the right word for what I feel. I've accepted what happened, I understand the reasons behind his actions and mine, and I'm choosing to move forward with him. But forgetting what he did isn't possible, and maybe that's okay. The memories are still there, still sharp, still capable of making my chest tight when I think about waking up unable to breathe. I explain that I've made peace with carrying those memories forward into whatever version of us we're building now. Jason nods slowly, processing this, and I can see he's disappointed, but also relieved that I'm being honest, instead of giving him easy comfort he doesn't deserve. I ask him the same question about my retaliation, about the weeks I spent systematically destroying his sleep and sense of safety. His answer comes slower, more careful. He says he understands why I did it, that on some level he's grateful because nothing else would have made him stop. But he can't pretend it didn't scare him, can't pretend he doesn't sometimes wake up expecting me to be standing over him with a flashlight. We're both living with the consequences of our actions, carrying around the damage we did to each other, and that's just reality now. There's no magical reset button, no way to go back to being the people we were before he started watching those prank videos. We sit in silence for a while after that, not uncomfortable exactly, just two people acknowledging the weight of what they've survived together. 2 months later, we have our final session with Felix. We've been seeing him for 8 months total, and he tells us we've done the work most couples never manage. We've learned to communicate directly instead of through punishment. We've established boundaries that actually mean something, and we've proven we can use the tools he's taught us. He gives us his blessing to end regular therapy with the understanding that we can return anytime we need to. The real test, he says, is maintaining this without professional scaffolding, without someone watching and guiding us through every conflict. Jason and I shake his hand and thank him for basically saving our marriage, though we all know we did most of the saving ourselves. Walking out of his office feels strange, like graduating from something we never wanted to enroll in but needed desperately. A year after everything started, after Jason first covered my nose while I slept, we're in a stable place that looks nothing like where we began. We have hard boundaries now, lines we both know better than to cross. We communicate honestly even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Our relationship is built on mutual respect that came from mutual destruction, from both of us learning exactly how much damage we're capable of inflicting on someone we love. It's not a fairy tale ending where everything's perfect and we've forgotten the bad times. We both carry scars, visible ones in how we move around each other, how we're still careful about sleep and personal space. Our personalities changed through what we did to each other. I'm harder now, quicker to establish boundaries, less willing to give second chances when someone shows me who they are. Jason's more careful, more aware of how his actions affect others, less likely to dismiss concerns as overreactions. We're together and we're functional, but we're making it work as different people than we were, in a different kind of marriage than we had. Jason never touches me while I sleep, not even accidentally if he can help it. I never weaponize his weaknesses or use his trust against him. We both understand that some lines, once crossed, move the entire relationship into new territory. Sometimes I miss who we used to be before all this, the easier version of us that didn't have to think so hard about trust and safety. But I remind myself those people couldn't protect each other from their own worst impulses. These new versions of us can.